Right now, in the middle of the Persian Gulf, sits a small island that most people have never heard of. But what happened to that island in the last 48 hours has just changed the entire direction of this war and sent shockwaves through every oil market, every government, and every military command center on the planet. Its name is Kharg Island. It is barely 5 miles long, a tiny coral island sitting about 21 miles off the coast of Iran in the northern Persian Gulf. Gazelles roam freely near its refineries. Thousands of workers live and sleep there, and through its terminals flows roughly 90% of everything Iran sells to the world in oil. 90%, merely the entire economic lifeline of a nation of 90 million people passes through this one small island, and on Friday night, American bombs fell on it. President Trump ordered the strikes as part of Operation Epic Fury, the ongoing military campaign against Iran that began on February the 28th. United States Central Command confirmed that more than 90 military targets were destroyed. On Kharg Island, including missile facilities, the oil infrastructure, Washington said, was deliberately spared for now. But Trump himself made the next part crystal clear. If Iran does not reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the critical waterway that Tehran has been blocking, strangling the world's oil supply, then the oil infrastructure on Kharg Island will be next. He said the strikes totally demolished much of the island. And then, in words that stopped the world cold, he told a reporter that the United States might hit Kharg Island again just for fun. Just for fun, Iran heard every word. And Iran's response was not silence, it was not retreat, it was not negotiation. Iran's Revolutionary Guard launched missiles and drones at targets in Israel and at free American bases across the region. Tehran called it the first round of retaliation. The first round. This channel covers the stories that matter most, explained in a way that everyone can understand. Subscribe right now, because what is unfolding between America and Iran at this very moment is the most consequential confrontation the world has seen in decades. And this is only part one. Kharg Island has been targeted before in the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. Iraqi forces bombed it repeatedly. And Iran kept it running every single time. They repaired it under fire. They rebuilt it under siege. They pumped oil through damaged pipelines while the bombs were still falling. That history is not lost on anyone in Tehran right now. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has made the position of his government absolutely clear. Iran will not be pressured into reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Iran will not bow to ultimatums delivered through bombing campaigns, and Iran will respond to every strike with strikes of its own. As many rounds as it takes, that is not posturing for a domestic audience. That is a government that has spent 40 years preparing for exactly this confrontation and is now telling the world that it is ready to see it through to the end. The Revolutionary Guard's missile and drone attacks on American bases and Israeli targets were calibrated, not random. They were designed to send a message that Iran can reach things, that Iran has range, and that the cost of continuing this campaign will not be paid by Iran alone. 3 American bases were targeted. Israel was targeted. And the word coming out of Tehran is the same word that keeps appearing in every statement, every broadcast, every declaration from Iranian officials. Defiant, completely and totally defiant, the world wanted Iran to flinch. And now the question sitting at the center of every emergency meeting in Washington, Tel Aviv, London, and Brussels is the same terrifying question. What happens next when neither side is willing to stop? The oil markets answered that question before any government did. Within hours of the strikes on Kharg Island, crude oil prices surged past $120 a barrel. Trading floors that had already been nervous became frantic. Analysts who had been predicting disruption were now revising their worst-case scenarios upward fast because the market understood something immediately that some politicians were still trying to explain away. Kharg Island is not just a military target, it is the economic heart of Iran, and striking it, even while deliberately sparing the oil terminals for now, sends a message to every buyer, every shipper. every energy company on Earth, that the terminals themselves could be next, that the 90% of Iranian oil that flows through that island could stop flowing at any moment, depending on what happens in the next phone call, the next airstrike, the next missile launch. Markets do not wait for certainty. They price in fear. And right now, fear is the most abundant commodity on the planet. Europe is watching with particular alarm. Several European nations depend heavily on Middle Eastern oil flowing through stable shipping lanes. The rerouting of tankers away from the Strait of Hormuz has already added enormous cost and time every delivery. If Kharg Island's terminals are destroyed in a subsequent strike, the supply shock would be felt not in weeks, but in days across every major economy on Earth. China is watching too. Beijing is one of Iran's largest oil customers. The disruption to that supply chain strikes directly at Chinese industrial output. And China has already made quiet but firm diplomatic contact with both Washington and Tehran, urging restraint. Whether anyone in Washington is listening to Beijing right now is another question entirely. The global economy was already fragile coming into this conflict. Growth was slowing. Inflation was still a concern in multiple major economies. Energy prices were the one variable that central banks and finance ministers had been quietly relieved about until 3 weeks ago. Now that relief is gone, replaced by a number on an oil chart that keeps climbing, replaced by shipping lanes that are either blocked or avoided, replaced by the cold reality that when the world's most volatile region ignites, nobody anywhere is truly insulated from the heat. And the fire is not out, not even close. Here is what makes this moment uniquely dangerous compared to every previous confrontation between America and Iran. In past standoffs, and there have been many over the past 4 decades, there was always a backstop, a quiet channel, a back door that both sides quietly kept open even while shouting at each other through the front. Diplomats who were not diplomats officially. Intermediaries in neutral countries carrying messages that could never appear in any official record. The machinery of de-escalation running silently underneath the noise of confrontation. That machinery is not clearly visible right now. The Trump administration withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal years ago. The diplomatic architecture that took years to build was dismantled. The relationships between American and Iranian officials that allowed for quiet communication during moments of crisis, those relationships have been systematically severed. And the result is 2 heavily armed sides exchanging strikes and counterstrikes with no clear mechanism for either side to step back without appearing to capitulate. That is the most dangerous kind of conflict. Not the kind where 2 sides are trying to destroy each other completely, but the kind where neither side knows how to stop without losing face, where every escalation feels necessary as a response to the last escalation, where the logic of the situation pulls both sides deeper even when the people involved can see exactly where it is heading. Iran cannot reopen the strait without looking like it surrendered under American bombs. America cannot stop the strikes without looking like it backed down in the face of Iranian defiance. And every day that passes without a resolution is another day of economic pain for ordinary people around the world who have absolutely nothing to do with the decisions being made in Washington and Tehran. The leaders of both nations are now prisoners of the situation they created, trapped by their own words, their own declarations, their own public commitments to never back down. Israel's watching its northern borders. Saudi Arabia is watching its own oil infrastructure. Russia has issued statements. China has issued statements. And the United Nations has issued statements. And none of it has moved the needle by a single degree. Because the 2 people whose decisions actually matter in this moment are sitting in offices thousands of miles apart, each convinced that the other will blink first, each waiting, each escalating just enough to increase the pressure without crossing the final line. But lines have a way of moving in wars, and final lines have a way of not being final at all. Here's the truth that nobody in any government wants to say at a podium, but everybody knows in private. This confrontation was always coming. The seeds of it were planted years ago in the withdrawal from the nuclear deal, in the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, in the maximum pressure campaign that squeezed Iran's economy for years without producing the surrender Washington expected, in the miscalculation on both sides that the other would eventually fold quietly and completely, neither side folded. And now the bill for all of those years of escalation without resolution is being paid not by the leaders who made the decisions, not by the generals who drew up the plans, not by the politicians who gave the speeches, by the people, by the Iranian families living under the shadow of strikes that could come at any hour, by the American families watching their cost of living climb week after week with no end in sight, by the workers on oil tankers rerouting through waters they never planned to sail, by the factory workers in Asia whose production lines are slowing because the energy that powers them is trapped behind a blockade in a strait 21 miles wide. Kharg Island is still standing. Its terminals are still intact. For now, Iran is still defiant, completely and totally. The Strait of Hormuz is still blocked. Oil is still climbing. And the two sides are still locked in a confrontation that neither has a clean path out of. What happens to that island in the coming days will determine what happens to oil prices, to the global economy, to the broader war, and to the millions of lives caught in the space between two governments that chose confrontation over compromise. History is being written right now, not in history books, not in classrooms, in real time, in missile trajectories and oil prices and emergency meetings and families holding their breath on two sides of the world waiting to find out what the powerful men in those rooms decide to do next. This channel will be here for every development, every update, every turn this story takes, because this is the story of this moment in history, and it deserves to be told straight, told clearly, and told without filter. Subscribe and stay close. The next chapter is already being written,